All right, this is Jim Kasper with Ben Franklin Community Garden. We're going to do some planting today. It's a beautiful day in the garden here. Give you some tips on how to plant. I got some broccoli to put in my little raised bed here, and we're going to show you how to plant some radishes that I did that little multi-sowing thing on. I planted these the same day we did the last video. So that's about 10 days ago. And then we got 2 tomato plants, and we'll get into them a little bit later. But the first thing we're going to do is going to put in some broccoli. So I planted these a while back. They were a little bit long in the tooth now because I should have had them in, well, probably a couple weeks ago. First thing you do when you're planting a little tray or plugs like these is to soak them real good, because the biggest mistake a lot of gardeners is they don't water enough when they're transplanting, and that makes a huge difference in the survivability of your plants. So I soaked them in this little tray, so now they're saturated. And what we're going to do is, I got 2 holes dug right here. I'm going to put 2 of these in and show you how. Now normally I would just put a plug in the ground, a dibble in the ground, and just stick these in, but these are, I want to plant these up to about this high at least, so they don't get all floppy. So we're going to do that here in a minute. I'm going to add a little bit of my favorite amendment. This is chicken manure. So this is well composted chicken manure. I picked this up at Wilson's Feed Mill down on Canal Road here. He's one of the few people that actually have chicken manure. You can get cow manure, that works too. But chicken manure's got more nutrients in it. Actually has more nitrogen, more potassium, and more potash than cow manure, almost twice. So it works real good. A little bit, just a little chuck in here in each hole. That's all it needs. And then we're going to do the same thing with water. Water is the most important thing when you're transplanting. We're going to fill the hole with water, and that mixes that chicken manure into the soil and keeps it off the roots for right now. And see how fast it sinks in. At the community garden up here, the ground is really sandy, so watering is important, and you can't overwater here, because the water just, you say what, it took like 30 seconds and that's all gone. I'm going to take that and where did I put my plants? Oh, here they are. So we're just going to pop these out. Kind of got to squeeze these little modules a little bit with your fingers and slowly, gently pry them out. That's all the plug with the roots. That one looks pretty good. I'm going to drop that one in here, and we'll take another one. We're just going to do 2 here. I'll save the rest for the garden when it opens up in a week or so. And that one will go in there. Then I'm like this, I'm going to water them again. I'm going to fill that hole with water again. Kind of like making mud pies, but that's filling them all the way up. And then all you got to do is cover them up. And they probably don't need this, but this is a little bit of fertilizer. This is Espoma organic fertilizer. It's a 445. It also has magnesium and sulfur in it, so it's like got Epsom salts in there as well. So just a little bit to dress around the plant, and we're gonna do this with the tomato plants as well. And one more time, I'm going to water them again. Might seem like a lot of water, but when I do this, or after I do this when I transplant stuff, you really don't got to water this for at least 10 days. week to 10 days, and they're good. They'll sit in that wet, soggy soil, and the roots will take hold, and then they'll take off, and you'll be much better off than not watering enough. So that's that one. All right, part 2. We're going to come over here to Delicious little garden. I planted these little, these are radishes. These are multi-sown, like I showed in the previous video. It's like 4 in each one of these little modules, maybe 5, some of them. And we're going to plop them in and show you how easy this is to do. All right. This is an old snow shovel. The shovel was shot. This makes this called a dibber. And it's got like a tapered end on here, which is perfect. And all you got to do is you come into your garden, you take this and you push this down just a little bit. We're going to make a little hole. And we're going to go about 9 inches away, put another hole. And once you get used to this, you can kind of guess pretty good the spacing. We'll put one more here. Then I come back on the other side, and I'm going to come over here on the triangle and space this out here. So, see, the ground here is nice and soft. This is a raised bed, so it's got a lot of compost in it, a lot of organic material, and so this will work perfectly. And these were soaked pretty good before I left. So I'm up here, and all you got to do, I'm going to give a little bit more water. They come out easier. You got to, once again, you just got to squeeze these little module trays. Coax it out. See, it's got nice roots there. A lot of people say you can't transplant root crops, but you really can. I've never had a problem with it. I've done this with radishes before and with beets, and they come out really nice. The plants are young enough that they're not forming a bulb yet, and most of the growth is on top. So now all you got to do is come in and drop them in. A couple more here. And all we're going to do is cover them up just a little bit. You see they're a little low, but that's okay. They tend to take nicely that way. That's all there is to it. It's really quick, and they'll take off here like no tomorrow. And you can water them again. And that's all there is. One thing with radishes, you don't really want to fertilize them because you'll get all kinds of really nice bushy leaves on the top and you won't get a radish. They actually do better in porous soils, but so we don't want to fertilize them. We'll let them grow, and hopefully we get a bunch of radishes out of this. All right. Last thing I'm going to show you how to do is to plant tomatoes. This is a little specific to the Ben Franklin garden. Like I said before, you look out here, this ground is very sandy, And there's mistakes that people make that you want to try to avoid, especially if you're a first-time gardener up here. I see one mistake is people will put their tomatoes on a hill. And the ground is real sandy, and what you're doing is you're doubling the surface area, and that does two bad things. It lets the water evaporate faster, and also it doubles the surface area for your weeds. Weeds are bad. Actually, there's a third thing. The third thing is the roots have to go down. If you have a foot-high hill, the roots have to go down a foot before they get to where the water really is. And when you water, the water just rolls off. It's like water on the top of a mountain. It doesn't work real well. I actually prefer to plant my tomatoes on a level soil with actually a little bit of a bowl shape to it, so the water will actually go down around the plant. We'll show you how that is done in a minute. Another mistake people make is what you don't want to do, and I've been guilty of this, you don't want to be smoking cigarettes or have tobacco products when you're planting your tomatoes. They'll get what's called tobacco mosaic virus. And tobacco and tomatoes are actually related crops, and what'll happen is your plant will just stunt out. It happened to me one year up here, and it was bad. All my tomatoes, they got about this high and they stopped growing and they turned brown or black, and the leaves, it was terrible. So you don't want to do that. So it's a precautionary thing. Have the cigarette or your cigar after you plant your tomatoes. And the other thing is that, once again, is not enough water. I see people come up here and they stick their tomato in the ground and they don't really water it. And there's the little packet of peat moss around the root ball. It dries out and the plants just suffer immensely. You don't want to do that. So, and you also, tips now, you want to plant your tomatoes deep. I've got 2 tomato plants up here that I brought up, that I grew from seed. This one's about 2 weeks older than this one. This one will actually catch up to this one in a little bit. This one's actually almost too large to transplant. The smaller the plant is actually better because there's less shock to the plant. But well, I'm going to plant this one up to about this deep. You can see here, you're going to have about 3-4 inches of this stem I'm going to actually put in the ground. On this one, I'm going to go up to about here, also about 3 inches deep. All these little hairs on the sides of the tomatoes, I don't know if you can see that. Those will all become potential roots, and then it'll work well. So this is similar to what I did with the broccoli a minute ago, but I got 2 plants here. The other thing I want to tell you is there's two different kinds of tomatoes. There's a lot of different varieties, but there's 2 basic types. You have determinate and indeterminate. This is a black crim. This is a really wonderful tomato, but it's indeterminate. So it'll keep growing until the frost comes, and it'll grow, if all things are well, it can grow 10 feet tall, and it'll keep producing fruit during the season. This is a Roma tomato. This is a determinate tomato. It will get about maybe 2.5 feet tall. It'll stop growing and produce all its fruit very quickly. So you'll get maybe 2 pickings out of it. The tomato will be done and it'll die, which is okay because they're wonderful tomatoes, but you're going to get a glut of tomatoes all at one time. This one will spread it out over a longer period of time. And you kind of, you got to figure out what you got. If, you know, when you're buying tomatoes, you don't want, if you want things that only grow a certain height, don't get your indeterminate ones, get the other ones. And these also need to be staked. The bush tomatoes don't really need much of a staking. You can use the small tomato cage if you want to keep them in control. But they're only going to get so high, so they're not going to be as floppy as this one. If it grows 6 feet tall, it's going to flop over on the ground and make a mess. So most people stake those. All right. So I got my favorite tomato planting shovel here. This might seem a little big for you, but this is what I use because we're going to make a pretty big hole here. I'm going to put the big one in first. I'm going to go a big hole, nice and deep. See, we're about 12 inches deep here, 10, 12 inches deep. Then I'm going to take my chicken manure. And I'm going to put a couple nice shovelfuls in there. That's about right there. Once again, I'm going to put water in here. And that'll slowly soak down. I'm going to do this one first. Little more water. Like I say, you want these potting soil is mostly peat moss, so it'll dry out, and then it's resistant to water until it gets wet totally through, and then once it gets wet, it stays wet. But if it's all dried out, you want to soak these real good. Make sure that this root ball here is all nice and wet. Plant that down nice and deep. And just backfill. And like you see, I've got this little bowl shape, so the water will run down into that. As it rains, it'll keep the thing more watered. And then we're going to soak it again really pretty good. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to top dress with this little bit of this organic fertilizer. We're just going to do that. About a handful and a half. She's ready to rumble. The last thing I'll do is, after this gets established a little bit, is I'll come in and I'll put a mulch on top of this. I'll probably use something like over there. Greg's got a whole pile of compost, and I'll use compost to mulch with, or shredded leaves or something, and I'll come up a little higher, and that'll hold the moisture in, keep the water moisture fairly even. Tomatoes don't like to be really wet then really dry, really wet then really dry. They like an even amount of moisture. If you do that, get it like inconsistent watering, you'll get blossom end rot, and your first tomatoes will have that black bottom piece, and you can't eat them. They'll rot on you. But if you keep that's the main reason for it. People say it's because there's a calcium deficiency, but really the main cause is the inconsistent watering. We'll do another one here. I'll put this one in. You want to come about 18-20 inches away from your previous tomato and dig another hole. I'll usually dig all my holes and then come in and start planting. This one doesn't have to be as deep because it's a smaller plant, but once again, we're going to put the chicken manure in there. I think we're running out of water here, but I'm going to give this and you just snug it down a little bit. And I'll come back here in a minute and water this in real good. And we're pretty much Done. All right. There's two. It's one of the joys of gardening is planting tomatoes. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll see you up here at the garden in a little bit. Until then, keep your hands dirty and your heart clean, because we want to see lots of harvest this year.